Well, here we go again. First, I remember a long time ago, it feels like now, when we were still talking about, lockdowns and all that. I first covered the case of Ahmaud Arbery, who was a black supposed jogger, just going for a jog in the neighborhood that was gunned down by some virulent Klansmen. Or so the official narrative went at the time, and it was funny how that whole thing unfolded. And then we got the George Floyd thing, which, unlike the Ahmaud Arbery thing, had a pretty universal agreement of people saying, hey, what, he was using a $20 counterfeit bill, he might not have even known it was counterfeit, and then he ends up dead. Knee on his neck for 3 minutes after he's passed out. Everybody pretty much agreed at the time that, hey, bad situation. Then we get all these riots and things, and then, the media is telling us that, oh, well, the riots aren't a part of a peaceful protest, you have to separate them, which, was nonsense. They would never do that for any right-wing group. If there was any violence, if there was one person, who even said a mean word at a journalist, the whole protest would be condemned as violent by the press. But here we have rioters, not only shouting mean things at CNN, but actually beating up CNN employees and even going to CNN headquarters in Atlanta and trying to burn it down before being, stopped by the police. And then eventually it felt like this week, or last week, it felt like, things were starting to calm down. That there wasn't as much violence going on, and that there was just more, it was more of the aftermath, people still talking about, how cops are bad and stuff, and then we had the Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone wasn't that fun, and so I felt like we were moving on, and then all of a sudden, on Friday night, all hell breaks loose, when an Atlanta cop kills some black guy at a Wendy's. And apparently this was some guy who was drunk going through the drive-thru and passed out while he was waiting for his food. And so the Wendy's called the cops to wake him up and get him out of there. And of course they made him, they had him take a breathalyzer, which, from what I understand, the smart thing to do is if a cop offers you a breathalyzer, you want to turn it down and just go to the station and get arrested, which sounds counterintuitive, but that's what I've heard is like the better legal thing to do. Because maybe then they do a full toxicology report and there's like there's a margin of error. There's more error when it comes to the breathalyzer, I think. So if you're on the edge, it might register you as over the legal limit when you're not. But this guy apparently was like 10 times the legal limit. So he was not really on the margin. So probably wouldn't have helped him just to decide to get arrested and not take the breathalyzer. But either way, it was very clear his goal was to not get arrested, because once he took the breathalyzer, and it was clear that he was, heavily intoxicated. Although, he seemed probably not okay to drive, but he wasn't, he wasn't falling all over himself drunk when he was talking on the body cam footage. But, what ended up happening was the cops decided, okay, you're drunk, so we have to arrest you for DUI, because you were in the driver's seat of your car, you were driving through the Wendy's drive-thru. So you're getting a DUI, and the guy resisted and grabbed the taser and ran off, and that's when things become a little murky because we don't have the best video, at least that I haven't seen yet. We have one video where they run off screen and you can't see them, and then you hear the gunshots, and then there's another one which captures the full scene from the Wendy's surveillance, and in that one, it looks to me, actually, in the first video, it looked to me like the cop at first did not pull out his gun. He pulled out, his own taser, because I think Rashard Brooks was his name, grabbed the taser from the other officer, because I see the officer chasing Brooks pull out something that looks yellow, and it fires what looks like the darts with the wires attached to it that the police tasers have. The kind that sort of, hook into your skin and then they zap you. Well, my guess is he must have missed Brooks because, Brooks keeps running and then he turns around and points the taser at the cops. At least that's what it looks like. We can't see exactly, but, that's what the police are saying, and the video seems to confirm at least something like that happened. And then the cop pulls out his gun and shoots him. Now, in ordinary times when there's not a lot of tension over this sort of thing, this probably might generate some angst amongst locals, but this wouldn't be a national story. You have a guy who had a DUI, resisting arrest, and then and then stole a taser and tried to, use it on the cops, and he got shot, and oops, he died at the hospital. But with all this going on, you had to know that, the first response to all this is that, people are going to immediately think that this is totally unjustified in every way. And, I mean, looking at the video, do I really think that it was a great idea to shoot the guy? Well, it's hard, because I think of it from the perspective of an ordinary American, and I know that as an ordinary American who's not a police officer, I would get charged for murder unless I shoot someone who's actively, attacking me. If someone's in retreat and they're running away from me, and I shoot them in the back, then I'm going to jail. And now police, from I understand, are not trained that way, because they're trained to hunt people down. The job of a cop is to arrest, people who are suspected criminals. And so, can I say that, in principle, given what his job description is, that he did anything wrong? No, I just think that he did something that was, very dumb in our current context. I mean, if I were a cop right now, I would not be, I would look at every time I pull out my gun that I'm sticking my neck out there, and that I am, the one under threat, unless I'm being, directly attacked by somebody. But if you're a cop and you're using your gun in an offensive way, you are going to be in a pretty bad predicament. You're going to be held to a very high standard. A standard, dare I say it, almost as high as an ordinary American. And so if I were in this guy's position, I'd look at it as, oh, okay, guy in the Wendy's parking lot had a DUI, he's running away. I'm not going to shoot him because I don't want to put my livelihood at risk. That's the way I would look at it. Now you might say, oh, well, he had the police taser, he's a threat, he's running away, he's drunk, he could go out and hurt somebody. That may be the case, but if I'm in that cop's shoes, I'm not taking the risk. My advice to all cops out there is just do everything you can not to shoot someone. I understand that, this guy already fired his taser, and so the tasers are kind of one-shot deals. If you miss with the taser, I believe the training is, you switch to the gun, because that's your last resort to try and, subdue a suspect. But if it's a situation like this where it's, something like DUI, which, is a real crime, I don't think that DUI should be legalized or something like that. This isn't, this isn't something as BS as, peddling a counterfeit $20 bill. Driving while, 10 times over the legal limit, with blood alcohol content is dangerous, because you can kill somebody on the road. There's other drivers on the road. I'm not saying that DUI is okay. But when you're under so much scrutiny, I just don't see the point in trying to hunt down every last perp. Cops right now, really, the best thing they can do is the bare minimum that they have to do. The less cops are noticed right now, the better off that they will be. Because in every one of these situations, the mob is going to side with whoever gets killed, because they're already whipped up into that frenzy of, the police is just killing innocent people. So when the cops kill somebody like this, they're going to give, the suspect the benefit of the doubt. Much in the same way that, a lot of people would tend to believe that suspects who get caught up in, bad times with the police had it coming. The attitude right now with a lot of folks is that, the police are the ones who are always up to no good, and they kind of have it coming. What sort of rioting did we get last night in response to all this? Well, they burned down the Wendy's for no apparent reason. All day they were not letting people go to the Wendy's. If anyone tried to pull in the parking lot, they were, blocked by the mob, shouted down, and, they hurled, epithets at them, telling them, hey, go get a burger at a black-owned business. Which, if you're driving down the road and you're just looking for some fast food, I don't know how, which one is owned by a black person or not. I mean, for all I know, that Wendy's could have been owned by a black franchisee. But the protesters, I guess, since they're maybe too afraid to directly attack the police and go burn down the police precinct, like what happened in Minneapolis, they just decided to blame everything on Wendy's, because Wendy's happened to be where this guy got killed. And the police, of course, did not protect the Wendy's. The Wendy's was burned to the ground. Now, CNN, I have to give them some credit, was trying to document this, and the rioters, beat up CNN and smashed their camera. They do not like CNN. But CNN still called them, protesters and said, well, the protesters didn't like us filming their protest. Oh my God, it's completely unbearable. Even, how much more cucked can you be? That, when your own guys are getting beat up by these rioters, you still refuse to call them out and call them rioters. You still are carrying water for these people who detest you on the most basic level. They hate you just as much, if not more, than the average Fox News viewer. And then, in addition to burning down the Wendy's, they decided to shut down I-75, which I'm sure is quite scary, because if you're going through there and you happen to be, in the line of cars that get stopped, what happens a lot of time is the mob will come up and just start smashing all the cars on the highway. That's their way of protesting, is they jump in front of these people, make them stop, and then they smash their cars and graffiti them and things. Now, I haven't seen any evidence of this happening in this case, but, that's my first thought. If I'm one of those cars that gets stopped, you're scared to death. Imagine if you have kids in the car. Because this has happened in other cities. When they shut down the highways, they go and just, beat on cars and things. It's frightening. And, of course, if you don't have a lot of money and your car gets totaled by a mob, you're kind of screwed. But this isn't how the mob thinks. The mob wants to say that everybody's responsible for the actions of individual police officers or whatever. I mean, the comments on Twitter, of course, are absolutely disgusting when you see this kind of violence. People are going, it's like, well, are you saying that a Wendy's is more valuable than black lives? It's like, shut up. I have no patience left for these people. As Hans Hoppe said, crush the anti-fascist mob. That's how I feel the more I look at this stuff. At first, because remember, I'm one of these people who's, rather critical of the police state and of, government tyranny and all these things. But, these people are deranged. And don't twist that into meaning a racial thing. I've been very clear from the beginning that I think that this is a whole left-wing movement. I mean, just look at the Chaz. I mean, do you think that there's too many black people in the Chaz? But, of course, with Atlanta, you're going to get a lot more black people. But, this is not something that has to do with skin color. And neither, frankly, does the policing thing. I've explained, so many times, why I just detest the racialist argument about crime and about policing. And I've explained the statistics, because there's this thing called multivariate analysis. You might not have heard of it, but just because, there is a correlation between two things doesn't mean that there's a direct causation. Just because the number of black people killed by cops as a percentage of their population is higher than whites, even though the absolute number is still much lower, that does not mean that cops are, just going out and looking to kill black people because they're black. There are other variables you have to control for, like poverty, and whether they live in high crime areas or not. And of course, poverty tends to determine whether or not you live in a high crime area. If you're LeBron James, you're not going to live in a high crime area, and you're probably not going to have too many terrible interactions with the police. But, it's just these arguments have been made so many times, time and time again, that if you haven't gotten through to people at this point, you're not going to get through to them. They believe what they want to believe. And they're going to blame who they want to blame. And, they're not even just blaming the police. They're blaming all white people and demanding that I and other people who don't have enough melanin in our skin bow down to those who do have enough melanin. Now, I don't know exactly where the line is. You look at guys like Barack Obama. He's pretty pale for a supposedly black man. What's the rule? Is having one black grandparent maybe make you a black person? We could use the same rules the Nazis used for the Jews. Or are we going to use the one-drop rule from the Old South, to where if you had one drop of black blood, well, then you're a black person? The racial theorists on the left, I don't think have thought this out so much. Now, I guess a lot of the right-wing racists have, and they probably have their own rules, but, I don't read them because they're not relevant. Despite what the rioters might tell us and what their apologists on Twitter might say, these phantom white supremacists just aren't anywhere. I've never met any of them. Right-wing racism is about the most, marginalized idea in America. Left-wing racism, on the other hand, is exalted, and in fact, those who do not endorse left-wing racism and practice it openly are condemned themselves as evil racists. It's quite ironic. So I suspect that the killing of this Rayshard Brooks character is going to reinvigorate things, and, I do feel bad for him and his family. I don't think that he should have died. I mean, obviously the man was intoxicated, so he wasn't, making the best decisions. He was very drunk, and, I would like to think that there was a way that, they could have gone about things that did not result in his death. But either way, at this point, there's much bigger issues on the table than just his death. It's, the cohesion and the collapse of our society. So with that said, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see folks back here tomorrow.